railway line near Kochetovka 2 in Russia's Tambov region exists in the way the most important infrastructure often does, by being ignored. It cuts through interior territory, far from borders and far from cities that attract attention, running across land that has never needed to explain itself. Nothing about this stretch of track looks urgent. Nothing about it suggests vulnerability. It is built for continuity, not caution, and it survives precisely because it has never demanded to be noticed. Freight moves here because it always has. Schedules repeat. Crews rotate. Signals change when they are supposed to. The system closes behind each train, as if sealing the past, resetting the assumption that the next movement will be just as uneventful. In places like this, safety isn't enforced by defenses or patrols. It's enforced by routine. The quiet belief that nothing significant happens where nothing significant has ever happened before. Fuel trains pass through Kochetovka 2 as part of that rhythm. Tanker wagons, filled with gasoline and gas, roll along the line, logged, inspected, approved, and released into circulation by processes so familiar they no longer register as dangerous. On paper, the cargo is volatile. In practice, it becomes normalized. The hazard is managed so consistently that it fades into abstraction, something handled by checklists rather than intuition. That normalization is what keeps systems efficient. It's also what makes them fragile. Because when infrastructure is trusted this completely, failure doesn't arrive as a warning. It arrives as interruption. Sudden, irreversible, and impossible to ignore. On February 4th, 2026, a freight train entered the Kochetovka 2 area carrying 16 tanker wagons. 11 were loaded with gasoline. 5 carried gas. There was nothing unusual about the configuration, nothing that would have drawn additional scrutiny from operators or dispatchers. The train was not carrying passengers. It was not stopping at stations. It was not moving through contested space. It was doing what it was meant to do, moving fuel through the interior. Rail systems rarely fail suddenly. They fail gradually, in ways that are difficult to see until they can no longer be corrected. Alignment shifts within tolerance. Components degrade without crossing thresholds that trigger alarms. Inspections are performed according to schedule, not according to intuition, and schedules exist to keep traffic moving. When something begins to go wrong, the system often assumes it will correct itself, because it usually does. Somewhere near Kochetovka 2, several of the tanker wagons left the rails. The exact mechanics of the derailment were not immediately clear, and they would later become the subject of investigation rather than public explanation. What mattered in the moment was not how the wagons derailed, but what they carried. Shortly after the derailment, fuel escaped containment. Gasoline vaporized, gas vented. Ignition followed quickly enough that the sequence collapsed into a single event for anyone watching from a distance. The explosion was powerful, producing a fireball large enough to be seen far beyond the rail corridor. Thick black smoke rose rapidly, dense and sustained, signaling the nature of the cargo more clearly than any official statement could. This was not a brief flare or a contained burn. It was a fuel fire, fed by volume and pressure, expanding until it exhausted what it could consume. All 16 tanker cars were affected. Some ruptured fully, others partially, but none were spared. 11 gasoline tankers and 5 gas tankers became part of the same burning mass, heat transferring across steel designed for transport rather than failure. Once the first breach occurred, escalation followed physics rather than procedure. There was no pause in which decisions could alter the outcome. The first images appeared online before formal explanations did. Videos taken from a distance showed the fireball and the towering smoke column, the scale difficult to contextualize because the location itself was unfamiliar. The images spread quickly, not because they provided understanding, but because they demanded interpretation. In the absence of information, people filled the gaps themselves. Official responses were measured. Authorities confirmed that the incident did not involve a passenger train and did not occur at a public railway station. They stated that no civilian deaths or injuries had been verified. Each clarification narrowed the perceived scope of the event, drawing boundaries around its consequences even as the fire continued to burn. Emergency response units were dispatched according to protocols that exist for exactly this scenario, though they are rarely used. Firefighters arrived alongside railway emergency teams. Specialized equipment designed to handle fuel-related fires was deployed, acknowledging that conventional suppression methods would be insufficient. Firefighting trains moved toward the site, traveling along the same network that had just demonstrated its vulnerability. More than 20 emergency vehicles converged on the area. Their role was not to extinguish the fire immediately, because fuel fires do not allow for that, but to isolate it, prevent spread, and manage secondary risks. The response focused on containment rather than reversal, accepting that some damage could not be undone. Rail traffic on the affected section was halted completely. This decision was not symbolic. Rail networks operate on certainty, and that certainty had been broken. Long-distance trains were delayed or rerouted, schedules adjusted to avoid a segment that could no longer be trusted. Authorities stated that nearby residential areas were not under immediate threat, and no evacuations were ordered, reflecting both the geography of the line and confidence in the perimeter established by responders. Early statements described the incident as a transport accident, potentially linked to technical failure or operational issues. The language was deliberate. It placed the event within a familiar category, one governed by investigation rather than accusation. Some independent sources suggested the possibility of sabotage, but no evidence was presented publicly, and Russian authorities did not endorse that interpretation. No country, organization, or group was accused. Officials emphasized that there was no confirmation of terrorism or foreign involvement, and that conclusions would wait until technical data had been fully reviewed. In a system already under strain, restraint and attribution served a stabilizing function. The broader context mattered even if it was not explicitly referenced in official statements. The incident occurred during a period when Russia's logistics networks were operating under increased pressure due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Fuel transport by rail is central to military mobility and industrial output. Gasoline and gas sustain vehicles, generators, production lines. Disruptions to that flow, even when accidental, carry weight beyond the immediate site. Emergency services remained on scene long after the most visible flames were reduced. Inspections began. Damaged wagons were assessed. The affected route was suspended. Officials reiterated that final conclusions would be announced only after a full review of technical data. Until then, the cause remained undetermined. From the outside, the incident appeared contained. From inside the system, it introduced friction. Railways function through habit more than through vigilance. Track is trusted because it is held. Rolling stock is assumed to function because inspections passed the last cycle. Procedures are followed because they usually work. None of these assumptions are reckless on their own. Together, they create efficiency. They also create fragility, because when one assumption fails, the system has little time to adapt. Fuel magnifies that fragility. Unlike other cargo, it does not permit gradual failure. Once containment is compromised, escalation is immediate. Response windows collapse. Decisions made months earlier about maintenance schedules, routing priorities, and load density suddenly matter more than anything done at the scene. That is why incidents like this draw attention even without confirmed intent. They expose dependency. They reveal how much movement relies on uninterrupted flow. A single derailment does not halt a national network, but it introduces doubt, and doubt changes behavior. Speculation continued online, sustained by the absence of a definitive explanation and by the broader environment of conflict. But speculation does not repair track or restore schedules. What alters systems is adjustment, often quiet and unacknowledged. Investigators moved slowly through the site. Measurements replaced urgency. Steel fragments were cataloged. Wheel sets examined. Couplings assessed for stress patterns that might indicate sequence rather than outcome. This work rarely produces immediate answers, but it shapes how future decisions are made. The route remains suspended longer than the fire burned. That delay mattered more than the explosion itself. Reopening infrastructure too quickly signals confidence that may not exist. Waiting signals caution, and caution spreads through planning rooms and dispatch centers, even when it is not publicly discussed. Fuel trains continued to run elsewhere. The system did not stop, but it did not move in quite the same way. Inspections were taken more seriously for a time. Assumptions were questioned, briefly. Schedules were reviewed with an awareness that continuity is not guaranteed. That heightened attention does not last indefinitely. Systems normalize. Routine reasserts itself. But incidents like Kochetovka 2 leave a residue, a memory embedded in procedures rather than narratives, influencing decisions in ways that are difficult to measure. The physical signs faded. Burned material was cleared. Smoke dispersed. The landscape returned to anonymity. Nothing about the area suggested that 16 tanker wagons had burned there, that rail traffic had halted completely, that logistics had paused. But logistics does not measure impact by visibility. It measures it by confidence, by margin, by how much flexibility remains when something unexpected occurs. The absence of a public conclusion preserved uncertainty. Not knowing whether the derailment was mechanical, operational, or something else kept planners cautious longer than certainty would have. That caution is uncomfortable, but it is also instructive. Because systems built on repetition depend on forgetting their own vulnerability. They function best when failure is theoretical. Events like this interrupt that forgetting, even if only temporarily. The track near Kochetovka 2 will carry fuel again. Trains will pass. Schedules will stabilize. But inside the system, the knowledge remains that interior infrastructure, far from attention and far from threat, can still fail without warning. Not because someone intended it to, but because systems assume tomorrow will resemble yesterday, right up until the moment it does not. And when that assumption breaks, the consequences linger longer than the smoke ever did. Unresolved, quietly present, shaping decisions long after the fire is gone. What do you think? Was this an attack, or just a simple mistake by Russia? And if you enjoy watching these documentary-style military news breakdowns, please subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below.